Hi, I'm Ollie and I've just made this stencil on the CNC and I'm going to show you how to make it. So what I'm trying to do is basically just trying to get the concept from my head onto paper so that I can then have a better idea and visualise it more. A lot of my inspiration comes from street art, so graffiti artists like Shepard Fairey, Banksy, people like that. So a lot of it uses like a couple of colours, so like in most of these there's not loads of colours and the shapes are fairly simple, and so like this would be very hard to do because it's an image, whereas with fonts and stuff it's a lot easier because you can see the lines, they're fairly simple, especially with like I want to use a font where it's got straight edges and corners so that then I can link up the vectors to give that 3D effect. Cool, so I think I've got some good ideas there, so we're going to go look at it in the software. So basically now I need to go from paper to the software really. I'm going to use the text tool to obviously create the text. I'm then going to copy the text and then move it down and across to create the shadow effect. I'll then join up these points to then give that 3D look. And then using the snipping tool, I'll then be able to create the vectors I need to then cut. I'll also be using, I think I'll use the bitmap tracing tool because that would be really handy with the spanner to create those vectors. So I'm not sure if it will work, but I'm going to give it a go and see where I get to. So I've just opened up Cut 2D Desktop. So before we start actually making the design, I just wanted to show you what I've got in my head and what I'm aiming to create in the software. So if we go and create a new file, the dimensions are going to be 15.75 inches by 15.75. And then we've got a thickness of 0.12 inches. This is just for the MDF board that we're going to use to cut out the stencils. So we're going to go off the material surface and XY datum in the bottom left hand corner. So the font I used here is Oswald because of the sharp corners that will make it easier to link up the vectors. So if we just scale that down, get it into the middle. What we want to do next is convert it to curves, so then we can link up the corners. Copy that and then move it down and across. This will create the shadow effect and also allow us to link up corners to create that 3D effect. You want to make sure that the snap options are all on for this, so that basically when you're trying to link up the corners of each of the letters, it automatically snaps to those corners. Now we're just going to be going and basically you want to find the corner of each part of the letter and connect it to the corresponding corner of the copied letter. So I'm just going through, making sure that I'm just connecting all of the corners. One tip for this is if there's any tricky corners or any corners that aren't quite snapping, if you zoom in a bit, it will normally then bring up the snapping. So that's a little tip. Once we've done that, we want to basically trim out any of the vectors or the lines that we don't need. So the way that I normally do it is I focus on the original letter and anything inside that original letter we'll need to delete. This gives a good starting point to then clear out some of the lines to then make it easier to see where the 3D shape will be. So yeah, once we've cleared out all of the original letter, then it's onto the background vectors. So it's just a case of basically just deleting any that you wouldn't be able to see on a 3D object. And there you have it. You can pretty much see the 3D M now with all the vectors that we need. So if we just go and center that. Okay, now that we've got our M, basically the next step is to divide it up into the 3 layers. Because basically this is going to be a 3 coloured stencil. So I'm just going to go ahead and create the 3 layers that I need to split them up. I also keep a copy on layer 1 just in case I want to go back. So what I want to do is just copy what I've got on the first layer onto the other 3 layers. That way I can then go into each layer and then edit out the bits that I don't need for each one. The next step is basically to go onto each layer and cut out the bits that I don't need. So the top layer will just be the letter. So to do this, I've just selected the letter, pressed Shift, select everything else, and then deleted it. Now we're going to go onto the shadow layer and then just cut out anything that we don't need for the light part of the stencil. So this will just be the bits that are lighter. So basically the dark bits are going to be the bits that are underneath, so as though the light is coming from above. That will then create the 3D effect. I'm now just going to go onto the dark level and snip away anything that I don't need. Okay, now you can build back up the layers and you can see that when put all together we get back to the 3DM. So for the next part, I want to visualize how this will actually look. So what I'm going to do is use the pocket toolpath with a much smaller tool and then fill that pocket toolpath with colors to then see what it will actually look like sprayed. So I'm just going to go in, select one of these end mills, select that, and then what I want to do is edit the tool to make it a lot smaller than it actually is. This is just so I can see what the colours will actually look like, and we're never going to use this toolpath on the machine, so it's just for a visual representation really of what we'll end up with. Then preview the toolpath and then select the toolpath colour, so the red, which I'm going to use for the letters. You can then go through and do this for the shadow one with a lighter blue. Select the toolpath colour of the lighter blue. And for the final layer, which will be the dark one at the bottom, will be the darker blue. Now we can see on this one that we've got some vectors that aren't quite joined up correctly. So a really good tool that we can use is the vector validator tool. This is where all the selected vectors that you highlight, it will show anything that there are any low overlaps or anything wrong with the vectors. We can then just go in, as you see, and snip out any overlapping vectors or any vectors that aren't correct. I'm going to use this quite a lot in this project just to check all the vectors of what I want and there aren't any overlaps or anything like that. So when we come to actually making this, there isn't going to be any weird bits with the V carving. And then select the dark blue colour. So now you can see it's a really good visual representation of what we're actually going to end up with once we spray it, and the 3 colours. This is really good for testing out which colours you're going to use, and also that you cut all the correct vectors and it's actually going to look the way you want it to. Okay, now that we know that this concept is going to work and that we've turned a 2D letter into a 3D letter effect, we're now going to start by making the design that I came up with in my head originally. So first of all, we'll need to create the spanner vector. For this, I'm just going to drag and drop an image that I found online into the software to get the outline for the spanner. The bitmap tracing tool is a perfect tool for this, because basically you can bring in a bitmap or an image, select the colours that you want, highlighted in red, and just play around until you get all the colours that you need for the vector that you want it to draw. Once you're happy with it, you can change some of the settings to what you're happy with. It's worth having a little play with these just to see what suits you best. You can then preview the vector and then press apply. You can then hide the bitmap layer, go in and basically delete any other vectors that you don't need. Great, so we've got that spanner vector, so now that's all to do is just to put it in place where we want it on the design. So the next step to do is to add the text to the design, so the let's get making. Now that we have the 2D version of the design, we can now go about and to make it into 3D. So we convert it to curves and then copy it onto the letters layer. We will now go about doing the same process as we did earlier with the letter M. So we copy the vectors, move them across and down, and then we want to link up each of the corners of the original and the copied vectors. Top tip on the curves is just to try and align it the best you can with the edge of each curve from each of the vectors. For this next part, we're going to speed it up just because I'll just be joining up the vectors as I've shown you before. Next, we'll need to snip all the vectors that we don't need. Next, we need to copy the design onto each of the 3 layers like we did before. For the letters layer, we can just use the 2D vectors that we created to begin with. Now we need to do the lighter shadow layer, so I'm going to go around and cut out all the vectors that we don't need on this layer. Now that that's done, it's onto the dark layer. Now that they're all done, it's time to make sure that we've got all the correct vectors we want and it's looking the way we think it should. Okay, so that's all looking good, and as I had it in my head. So the next part is to carry on and get on with the toolpaths and stuff like that. But first of all, I need to add a detail into each of the 3 layers. Basically will help me line it up when I actually get to spraying the stencil. So basically on each layer we need a point where we can reference and we know it's in the same place on each one. This will make it a lot easier when it comes to spraying and lining up the layers. Okay, so we're now moving on to the toolpaths. We're going to be using a profile toolpath as we don't need to cut out all the material in the middle of the vectors. We just want them cut out. At first I was going to be using an end mill tool, as this is what you'd normally use for a profile cut. However, I noticed that a lot of the corners were rounded because of the bit's rounded edges. So I had a think and came up with, why don't I use a V-bit? This will then give the corners the straight edges that I need and will also keep all the detail. As you can see from the bottom left cross marker, I'll need to do the toolpath on the line rather than inside or outside of the line. So that's the first sheet done, on to the next 2. So for the next 2 sheets it'll be the same process, selecting the vectors we want to cut on the line and with the V-bit. Handy way I found to see if all the vectors had come through properly was by clicking the Z and holding down the Shift key, which will actually flip it or do the opposite of what it normally does. This works on all the X, Y and Z axes as well. I chose to do it this way, where the sheets are all in the same space rather than spreading them out onto separate sheets, just because this was a lot easier to visualise in my head, and also we'd be cutting them separately anyway. One more thing you may have noticed is that I didn't use tabs on this project. I've actually used double-sided sticky tape to hold down the parts of the material that are going to be cut. This is due to not wanting to sand off or cut all the tabs, as it would alter the design. So now that I have all the toolpaths ready, it's time to get back into the labs and get cutting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this bit of material to the wood here using double-sided sticky tape, and then I'm going to use these hold downs to then attach it to the machine bed. I'm using double-sided sticky tape to avoid any holes in the wood where we don't need it. So I'm using a V-bit so I can get into all the corners, because with an M mill obviously it's a much wider head of the tool, whereas with a V-bit it's to a point, so I can get in all the corners. Also the bevel or chamfer as well, when I'm spraying it, should help direct the paint as well. So we've got this all in the machine, we've got the 3 bits of material there. So all that's left to do is run the toolpaths. They should be pretty straightforward and pretty quick. So yeah, let's go. So on some of the bits, if the wood's flexed at all, or if the spoil board isn't completely flat, it won't cut all the way through. So on some of these bits, as you can see, there's only just a few little bits hanging on, keeping them actually in place. So we just need to just go around them with a Stanley knife. So basically I'm just sanding off all the rough edges just to make sure that the stencil's clean and clear, because otherwise if you don't, then you might get some bits of bleed, and also it's not going to look as good as you want it to. Yeah, well, good. So I'm just trying to line this up on the canvas just to make it square. I've put this little cross in the bottom left hand corner on all of the different cutouts, as you can see. So basically that's so I've got a reference point on every one. So each time I spray it, I can then reference the cross on the next one, line up the cross, spray the next one, etc. So yeah, I think I'm pretty happy to get spraying. I hope you enjoyed the project. It's come out really well. I'm really happy with it. There's lots of ways that you could spray this onto. So you could spray it onto a spoil board, t-shirts, walls, whatever you want really. Here I've done it on wood and canvas. Yeah, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video. The files will be available in your V&Co account to download. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon.